From the moment I took my first breath, my life seemed to revolve around my twin sister, Sophie. Although we're twins, Sophie is older by precisely 12 minutes, and somehow, in my family's eyes, those 12 minutes turned her into the star of the universe. My parents, Linda and Richard, always made it clear that Sophie was their miracle child. For as long as I can remember, they cast me in her shadow, sometimes deliberately, sometimes unconsciously. It was as though my entire existence was an unexpected footnote in a story that was only supposed to be about Sophie. I wasn't a problem child. In fact, I was the kind of kid teachers praised, polite, studious, curious. But none of that seemed to matter. Whenever Sophie and I shared an experience, the spotlight invariably ended up on her, even if I was the one who had truly accomplished something. I have a vivid memory from kindergarten. Both Sophie and I were in our school play. I was cast as Little Red Riding Hood, the main role, while Sophie had 2 tiny lines as a flower. During the performance, Sophie forgot her lines and started crying on stage. Instead of staying to watch my big moment, my parents rushed to comfort her. Later that evening, they barely mentioned my performance. All they talked about was how brave Sophie had been for trying. This pattern continued into elementary school. If Sophie got a C on a test, my parents would console her and reassure her that she'd tried her best. Meanwhile, I could bring home straight A's and barely get a nod of acknowledgement. One of the worst moments was in 4th grade, when I poured weeks of effort into a science fair project about renewable energy. I won first place and even got to talk to local environmental scientists. But when I brought home my blue ribbon, my parents hardly looked at it. Sophie, apparently, had a rough day at volleyball practice, and that was all they wanted to discuss. My dad used to joke at family gatherings about how Sophie was the older sister and therefore more responsible, despite us being twins. These comments reduced me to nothing but Sophie's shadow. It wasn't simply favoritism. It felt like I didn't truly exist as my own person. By middle school, this treatment started to erode my confidence and shape who I was becoming. I became obsessed with excelling, hoping I could finally earn the recognition I so desperately craved. I signed up for every club I could: student council, debate team, math club. I stayed up late, driven by an invisible scoreboard in my mind where I was always competing for the affection my sister received effortlessly. Yet no matter how hard I worked, Sophie remained the center of their universe. And deep down, I was already beginning to suspect that I would never be able to change that. By the time I reached middle school, the differences between Sophie and me felt carved in stone. I had grown intensely ambitious, pouring all my energy into my studies and extracurriculars, determined to prove my worth. Meanwhile, Sophie breezed through life with minimal effort, soaking up admiration simply for existing. I joined the math club, student council, debate team, anything where I could shine. I'd study into the early hours of the morning, my desk cluttered with textbooks, sticky notes, and highlighters. Sophie, on the other hand, spent her evenings lounging on the couch, chatting on the phone with friends, or heading to casual soccer practice. Yet somehow, it was her name my parents Linda and Richard praised over dinner. One memory from 8th grade stands out like a raw wound. I had been selected to represent my school at a state-level mathematics competition. For months, I buried myself in problem sets and practice exams, sometimes staying awake until 3 a.m. The day of the competition finally arrived, and so did a clash. Sophie had a recreational soccer game scheduled on the exact same day. My parents chose the soccer game. Not only did they skip my competition, they didn't even bother asking how it went afterward. When I came home proudly holding the second-place trophy, I was practically vibrating with excitement. But all my parents could talk about was how devastated Sophie was because her soccer team had lost. Any attempt to share my news was met with a distracted, "That's nice, honey, but Sophie had a tough day." High school only amplified the differences. I loaded up on AP classes, fought to keep a perfect 4.0 GPA, and continued filling my resume with every leadership opportunity I could find. I was laser-focused on college scholarships and building a future, Sophie spent much of high school drifting from one friend group to another, going to parties, barely scraping by with C's and the occasional B. But in my parents' eyes, she was the fun, social one, while I was too intense, too competitive, and too serious. One of the most painful moments came during senior year. I was named valedictorian, won a full scholarship to a top-tier university, and even had my story featured in our local newspaper. Meanwhile, Sophie barely graduated and enrolled in the local community college. Despite this, my parents seemed more distraught over Sophie not getting into her first-choice school than excited about my achievements. Our joint graduation party turned into a lamentation over Sophie's college prospects. My parents gave a speech that night where they never once mentioned my scholarship, my valedictorian honor, or my future plans. Instead, they kept saying how they believed Sophie would find her way, and how not everyone has to follow the same path. I stood there smiling politely, feeling like my soul was being scraped raw, realizing that no matter what I achieved, it would never be enough. The older I grew, the clearer it became. My parents were never going to see me as anything except the afterthought twin. I was the one who simply showed up 12 minutes too late. Leaving for college felt like escaping the suffocating walls of a house that had never really been home. I packed my bags, determined to build a life that wasn't defined by Sophie's shadow. I'd been accepted into a prestigious university on a full scholarship to study computer science, a program so competitive that only a fraction of applicants made it in. It should have been the triumph I'd waited for all my life. Instead, every time I came home on break, it was the same old story. Sophie, Sophie, Sophie. After a single semester at community college, Sophie dropped out, claiming she needed time to find herself. Rather than being worried, my parents somehow spun this into an act of bravery. In their eyes, she was courageous for stepping off the traditional path. Meanwhile, I was pulling 16-hour days balancing a brutal course load and a part-time campus job just to cover living expenses beyond my scholarship. It hurt that my parents never asked about my coding projects, my internships, or the professors who had started to take an interest in my work. They didn't know the name of my university's computer science building, nor the hours I spent debugging code into the middle of the night. All they cared about was whether Sophie was okay, and whether she decided what her next move would be. But college was also the place where, for the first time, I felt truly alive. Surrounded by smart, driven peers, I finally saw my value reflected back at me. Professors praised my talent. I landed competitive internships at high-profile tech companies. Slowly, I began to realize that my worth didn't depend on whether my parents recognized it. Even so, I clung to the hope that maybe one day my parents would change. Each break, I'd return home, heart full of cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, things would be different. But it never was. One Thanksgiving break during my junior year, everything came crashing into focus. At dinner, my Uncle Greg, a man who'd always enjoyed one too many drinks at family gatherings, blurted out something that hit me like an electric shock. He revealed that my parents had only ever intended to have one child. When they discovered they were having twins, my mother was devastated, worried about the financial strain. My father had simply shrugged and said, "We'll figure it out." Their solution was apparently to pour all their energy into one child, Sophie, and treat me as the unexpected add-on. Sitting at that dinner table, staring at the half-eaten turkey and cranberry sauce, everything finally made perfect sense. The neglect, the indifference, the perpetual overshadowing, it wasn't just favoritism. I was the unplanned twin who existed as an afterthought. That night I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, listening to Sophie's laughter drifting through the wall. Something deep inside me shifted. For the first time, I stopped trying to earn my parents' approval. Instead, I vowed to build a future where my worth wasn't dictated by them. And from that point on, I started living for myself. After that Thanksgiving revelation, my relationship with my parents grew even more distant. I threw myself into my senior year, determined to succeed entirely on my own terms. By the time I graduated college, I'd landed a job at a promising tech startup as a software engineer. The pay wasn't astronomical at first, but the real potential was in the company's stock options. I worked long hours, eager to prove myself, and after 3 years, I earned a promotion to senior developer. My financial future was looking solid, and for once, I felt a sense of pride in what I was building. Meanwhile, Sophie's life was unfolding like a page ripped from a glossy bridal magazine. After dropping out of community college, she drifted through a series of low-effort jobs before meeting Michael, a wealthy man she'd encountered at a high-end lounge. Within months, they were engaged, planning the sort of extravagant wedding most people only dream about. My parents were over the moon. They spent hours on the phone with Sophie discussing dress fittings, luxury venues, floral arrangements, and even hiring a celebrity photographer. Whenever I tried to talk about my own career, my promotion, the upcoming IPO, my big projects, they would nod absent-mindedly before steering the conversation back to Sophie's wedding. I didn't mind Sophie having a beautiful wedding. What I did mind was how it was funded. The only person who'd ever treated Sophie and me equally was our grandmother. She'd been a quiet but perceptive woman who saw how my parents favored Sophie. Before she passed away, she left each of us a sizable sum in her will, explicitly intended for our future weddings. She'd even pulled me aside privately and said, "Claire, I want you to have something that's just yours, because I know how things have been." I'd clung to that inheritance as a symbol of fairness in an otherwise lopsided world. Then came the bombshell. Months after Sophie's lavish wedding, Uncle Greg, once again after a few drinks, let slip that my parents had used not only Sophie's share of the wedding fund, but mine as well. They drained the account to pay for the over-the-top ceremony and all the extras Sophie insisted upon. I confronted my parents, shaking with disbelief. My mother waved her hand dismissively and said, "Oh, honey, we were going to tell you eventually. When we can, we'll pay you back." My father chimed in with words that cut deeper than any knife. "Sophie needed it more. She's the traditional one getting married. You're so wrapped up in your work. It's unlikely you'd even want a big wedding." I stared at them, numb, as they stood in the kitchen acting like it was all perfectly reasonable. In their minds, taking my inheritance was justified because it benefited Sophie. My wedding fund, the one thing that was supposed to be mine, had become just another resource for Sophie's happiness. When I got back to my apartment that night, I sat on the edge of my bed for hours. Every major achievement of my life, my valedictorian speech, my scholarships, my first promotion, had been either overshadowed by Sophie's struggles or ignored entirely. This was the last straw. I opened my laptop and wrote them an email. Calm, precise, and final. I told them I knew about the wedding fund. I told them I was finished trying to be the daughter they never wanted. I told them not to contact me again unless it was to repay the money. Then I blocked their numbers and wiped them from my social media. For the first time in my life, I felt an enormous weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't living in Sophie's shadow anymore. I was finally free to build a life that belonged only to me. After sending that email, I half expected my parents to show up at my door or bombard me with messages trying to guilt-trip me into reconciling. But for the first time ever, they respected one of my boundaries, perhaps because they realized there was nothing left to take. It was eerily quiet, as though I'd severed a connection that had never truly existed in the first place. In the months that followed, I poured myself into work like never before. The startup I worked for was preparing for its initial public offering, and the energy in the office was electric. My colleagues became my chosen family, cheering me on when I pulled long nights to meet launch deadlines or led crucial product demos. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who saw me, not as the other twin, but as Claire, the woman who was damn good at her job. When the IPO finally went public, my stock options vested, and suddenly, I was sitting on a personal fortune that far exceeded anything I'd ever imagined. Ironically, the shares I now owned were worth more than Sophie's entire wedding. That realization was bittersweet. Part of me still craved that moment where I could show my parents, "Look, I made it." But another part of me knew it would never matter to them, and I was finally okay with that. Beyond financial success, I started focusing on my mental health. I found a wonderful therapist who gently helped me peel back years of emotional scars. Week after week, I confronted the damage of growing up as the afterthought twin. I learned to stop blaming myself for my parents' failures to love me equally. I learned that my worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. I also bought my own condo, a sleek, modern space, in a vibrant part of the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a skyline glittering with possibility. It felt symbolic, standing there in my new home, knowing I'd earned every square foot with my own grit and talent. New friendships blossomed too. My best friend from college, Leah, helped me move and even threw me a small housewarming party with our work friends. We laughed, toasted with champagne, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was on the outside looking in. These people cared about me for who I was, not because I was attached to Sophie. Of course, now and then, Sophie would try to creep back into my orbit through distant relatives or mutual acquaintances. She'd send messages like, "Family should stick together," or "You're still my sister." But each time, I reminded myself that when Sophie happily accepted my wedding fund for her own big day, she'd made her choice about what family meant. Cutting ties wasn't easy. Some extended family tried to make me feel guilty, insisting I was being cruel or dramatic. But these were the same people who'd watched my parents treat me like a shadow all those years and never said a word. They didn't get to have an opinion anymore. Through it all, the biggest lesson I learned was this: sometimes, walking away isn't cruel. It's survival. And for the first time in my life, I was surviving on my own terms. About 2 years slipped by in a strange mixture of freedom and quiet melancholy. I'd settled into my life, a good career, therapy sessions that were slowly helping me heal, friendships that felt real and nourishing. For the first time, I was living without constantly measuring my worth against Sophie or my parents' impossible standards. Then everything changed with one unexpected phone call. It happened on an ordinary afternoon while I was in the middle of a team meeting, discussing rollout timelines for a new product feature. My phone started buzzing non-stop. When I glanced at the screen and saw Uncle Greg's name flashing, my stomach tightened. Greg never called me repeatedly unless something was wrong. Reluctantly, I excused myself and answered. His voice was trembling in a way I'd never heard before. "Hey, kiddo, it's Uncle Greg." Immediately, my pulse skyrocketed. "What's going on?" He took a shaky breath. "It's your parents. They were in a bad car accident. A truck ran a red light and hit them pretty hard." Time seemed to stretch and collapse all at once. I felt like I was underwater, struggling to hear the rest of his words. "Your dad's in critical condition. He's got internal injuries and they're talking about emergency surgery. Your mom's got several fractures and is in a lot of pain. They've both been in the hospital for a few days." "A few days?" I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. "Why is this the first I'm hearing of it?" Greg sighed. "They wanted to wait. I think they hoped things would stabilize before reaching out." Then came the part that flipped my stomach even further. Greg cleared his throat. "Claire, there's more. Their health insurance lapsed 6 months ago. They were struggling financially. Bad credit card debt, some failed investments. The hospital bills are piling up fast." It was like being sucker punched. For years, I'd built a life where I wouldn't have to deal with my family's chaos, and suddenly I was being yanked back in. "What about Sophie?" I demanded, already guessing the answer. Greg exhaled heavily. "She visited them once right after the accident, but she told them she couldn't help with the bills, said she didn't want to ask Michael for money so soon after the honeymoon. She says she's busy with her stepkids." I almost laughed. Of course, Sophie, who'd had no issue using my inheritance for her wedding, was nowhere to be found when our parents truly needed help. The next few days were a blur. I'd sit in my office staring out at the city skyline, unable to focus. Part of me was racked with guilt because no matter how angry I was, they were still my parents, lying in hospital beds. Another part of me kept screaming that this was the pattern all over again. They only reached out to me when they needed something. 3 days after Greg's call, my phone lit up with a text from Sophie. "I know you're doing well financially. Mom and Dad desperately need help. This is your chance to do the right thing." Her words made my blood boil. Where was her sense of doing the right thing when she happily spent my wedding fund on a celebrity photographer? Where was this sisterly loyalty when she watched my parents belittle my achievements year after year? And yet, no matter how justified my anger felt, there was a sick twist of guilt lodged in my chest. They were still my parents. They were hurt. And now, I was the one holding the power to help, or to walk away. I wasn't sure yet what my choice would be, but I knew one thing for certain. This time, if I did help, it would be entirely on my terms. For a week after Uncle Greg's call, I felt like I was suspended between two worlds. Part of me kept replaying the images of my parents lying in hospital beds, fragile and dependent. Another part of me remembered every slammed door, every ignored achievement, every dollar stolen from my inheritance for Sophie's wedding. Then, out of nowhere, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Greg. It was a hospital number flashing across my screen. I hesitated before answering. When I finally picked up, I heard my mother's voice on the other end. Even through the phone, it sounded thin and weak, slurred slightly by pain medication. "Claire, sweetheart," she began, as if we'd spoken just yesterday and hadn't been estranged for 2 years. "We're in a really difficult situation. The doctors say your father's surgery is going to be very expensive, and my physical therapy isn't covered under the new payment plan. They're talking about over $200,000, not even counting rehabilitation." My throat tightened, but I said nothing. She continued, trying to sound remorseful. "We know we haven't been perfect parents. We know we made mistakes, but—" "No," I cut her off, my voice suddenly cold. "You're not sorry, and you never will be." There was a pause, and then my father's voice chimed in, clearly on speaker. "Claire, that's not fair. We're still your parents. Family helps family. We're asking for help because we're desperate." Those 4 words, family helps family, sent a bolt of rage through me like an electric shock. I heard my own voice rise. "Family helps family. Where was that sentiment when you drained my wedding fund to pay for Sophie's lavish ceremony? Where was family when you missed my college graduation because Sophie was having a rough week? Where was family every single time you pretended my achievements didn't exist?" For a few seconds, the only sound was the soft beeping of hospital monitors in the background. Then my mother started crying, her tears as rehearsed and manipulative as ever. "How can you be so cruel?" she sobbed. "Your father might not survive without this surgery. Will you really abandon us at a time like this?" I took a long, shaky breath. The girl who once would have melted at her mother's tears was gone. "Yes," I said firmly. "Yes, I will, because you abandoned me my entire life. You made it clear that Sophie was the only child worth loving. You only want me now because Sophie's refusing to help and you've run out of options. I'm done being your plan B." I could hear my father sputtering, trying to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. "We're not a family," I said. "Not since you decided Sophie was the only daughter who mattered." And then, for the second time in my life, I hung up on my parents. I blocked the hospital number afterward because I knew my mother would try again, weaving new sob stories or desperate pleas. I stared at the silent screen in my hand, my heart thudding with adrenaline, grief, and, most surprisingly, relief. Moments later, I texted Sophie one last time. "They're your parents too. Try helping them yourself." I turned off my phone and sat by my living room window, staring at the city lights flickering like a galaxy outside. Despite the pain, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time, I had chosen myself. And that, I realized, was something my parents would never understand. For a few days after that last call with my parents, I tried to lose myself in work. I buried my emotions beneath lines of code, product timelines, and the buzz of office chatter. Yet every time my phone buzzed, a tiny spike of dread shot through me, wondering if another family member was about to try guilt-tripping me into saving the day. Then, on a cool evening, just as the sun was slipping below the skyline, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most of my friends would have texted before dropping by. Peering through the peephole, my breath caught. It was Sophie. She looked exactly like the picture-perfect socialite she'd become. Sleek hair curled into glossy waves, flawless makeup, a designer dress that probably cost more than a month of my rent back in college. And dangling from her arm was a Hermes Birkin bag I knew retailed for at least $15,000. Ironically, that purse alone could have covered a decent chunk of our parents' medical bills. For a split second, I thought about pretending I wasn't home, but a new part of me, forged from years of therapy and hard choices, refused to keep hiding from her. I opened the door, leaning casually against the frame. "Well, look who's here. To what do I owe this royal visit, Sophie?" Without waiting for an invitation, she swept past me into my apartment, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors. She paused, letting her eyes travel over my modern furniture, the city skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, and the artwork I'd finally allowed myself to buy as a treat. "Nice place," she said in a voice dripping with polite disdain. "Very cozy." Sophie had always used the word cozy as a subtle insult, code for small or not luxurious enough. "Cut the crap, Sophie," I said bluntly. "Why are you here?" She fidgeted with the strap of her expensive purse, a nervous habit from our childhood. "Mom and Dad are getting worse. The hospital's threatening to halt Dad's surgery unless they prove they can pay. They might lose the house. Physical therapy isn't covered. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars." I crossed my arms. "And that's my problem because you can help them," she snapped, color rising in her cheeks. "I know your company went public. I looked up the share price. You've got the money." I couldn't help the short, sharp laugh that burst from my chest. "Wow, Sophie. Doing research on me now? Did you do this much research before using my wedding fund for your celebrity photographer?" She winced, her perfect mask slipping for an instant. "That's different," she muttered. "I have a new family now. I can't just ask Michael for that kind of money. We have stepkids and financial plans. When a crisis happens, I can't just throw cash at it." My jaw clenched. "Funny how you could throw my cash at your wedding, but suddenly your hands are tied." She glared at me, eyes flashing. "You're being selfish, Claire. Mom and Dad need help. Are you really going to let them suffer just because you're holding a grudge?" My patience snapped. I strode into my office, grabbed my laptop, and returned to the living room. I rotated the screen toward her, revealing a dashboard of my stock options, investment accounts, and recent job offers that had been rolling in from rival companies. "Look at this, Sophie. These numbers? They mean I could pay off Mom and Dad's bills tomorrow if I wanted to. Hell, I could buy that suburban house of yours outright in cash. But I won't." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. But, you're just a programmer." "Not anymore," I said. "I'm a senior development director. While you were busy playing trophy wife, I built something real, and I did it without stealing from anyone else." Her face went pale. I shut my laptop with a firm click. "I could help them," I said. "But I'm choosing not to, because I'm done being your safety net. Or theirs." Sophie clutched her Birkin bag like a shield. "You'll regret this." "No," I said, opening the front door. "The only thing I regret is not cutting you all off sooner. Don't come back." And with that, I watched my sister, the girl who had once been the center of my family's universe, turn and leave my life for good. After slamming the door behind Sophie, I poured myself a glass of the expensive red wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Turns out, telling off my lifelong rival and finally severing toxic ties felt special enough. I settled onto my balcony as the city lights twinkled below, feeling both drained and exhilarated. But the fallout began almost immediately. By the next morning, my phone exploded with notifications. Sophie, true to form, had wasted no time spinning the story. She called every relative she could reach, sobbing about how I'd become cold and heartless, and how success had gone to my head. She claimed I was abandoning our parents in their hour of need, painting herself as the loyal daughter trying to hold the family together. Aunt Carol left me a voicemail dripping with disappointment, telling me that family means forgiveness, and that I was turning into someone cruel. An older cousin I barely knew messaged me on Facebook, saying I was cursed with pride and would regret my selfishness. Even Uncle Greg reached out again, invoking karma and the moral obligation of children to care for their parents, no matter what had happened in the past. For a few days, it felt like I was under siege, but instead of panicking, I did something I'd never dared before. I fought back with facts. I spent one entire evening compiling a digital folder. Inside, I included scanned copies of my grandmother's will, clearly stating the wedding fund was to be split equally, bank statements showing how the account had been drained for Sophie's wedding, text messages from Sophie explicitly refusing to help pay our parents' medical bills, despite her wealthy lifestyle, a breakdown of my net worth, proving I was fully capable of helping, but choosing not to for reasons entirely justified. Then, with my heart thudding, I posted the folder in the family group chat with a single message. Before anyone judges my choices, please understand exactly what's happened these past 28 years. And then, I waited. The silence was almost deafening. One by one, the scene notifications popped up beside each family member's name. No more guilt trips. No more lectures about loyalty. The chat, once buzzing with condemnation, fell dead quiet. Except for one response, from my cousin Natalie, who simply messaged, "Holy shit, Claire. You actually did it, and you were right. I'm proud of you." It was the first time in my life someone in my family had publicly sided with me, and it felt liberating. In the following days, the calls and messages tapered off. People either realized they'd been fed a heavily edited version of events, or they simply decided it was safer to stay silent. Sophie, however, wasn't finished yet. Late one night she texted, "Mom's crying every night because of you. You're breaking the family apart." I stared at her words for a long moment. Then I typed my reply, attaching a photo of the inheritance paperwork. Mom had decades to cry about how she treated me. Her tears don't work on me anymore. Then I blocked her number, for good this time. A strange calm washed over me. For once, the chaos wasn't mine to fix, and the family drama I'd carried on my shoulders for nearly 3 decades finally slipped away like a discarded coat. In the days following the fallout, my life felt astonishingly quiet. For the first time, my phone wasn't vibrating with demands, accusations, or veiled insults. Instead, I woke up each morning to sunlight streaming into my condo, the city humming outside my windows, and a sense of possibility that I'd never allowed myself to feel before. My therapist said something that stuck with me. Sometimes being labeled the villain by toxic people is just a sign that you finally started choosing yourself. And she was right. Shortly after the drama with my family settled down, an opportunity fell into my lap. My company offered me a promotion to Senior Development Director at our newly established office in another state. It came with a significant salary bump, a fresh round of stock options, and a chance to build a new team from scratch. For the first time in my life, I made the decision solely for me, not worrying how it would look compared to Sophie's choices or how my parents might spin it. I accepted the offer within 24 hours. With the move ahead, I listed my condo for sale. The real estate agent was practically drooling over the market value. It seemed my decision to buy in this neighborhood had been an excellent investment. I started browsing listings in my new city, envisioning myself in a modern penthouse overlooking a skyline I'd never grown tired of. Even while packing boxes, I felt lighter than I'd ever felt before. Gone was the silent calculation of how each step in my life might stack up against Sophie's. Gone was the gnawing guilt over whether I'd disappointed my parents. And gone, finally, was the hope that they'd ever become the parents I deserved. As I prepared to leave the city I'd called home for nearly a decade, I reached out to the people who had truly become my family. Leah, my college best friend, who had been there through every heartbreak and triumph. My colleagues, who celebrated my success without envy. And my therapist, who gently guided me toward self-acceptance. One night before my departure, Leah and I sat on my balcony with takeout boxes spread around us, drinking champagne straight from the bottle. She raised her glass and said, "To you, Claire, for finally living your life on your own terms." I laughed, feeling the bubbles fizz through my chest. "To me," I said, "and to never again being anyone's shadow." As I gazed out at the city lights flickering like stars, I thought back over everything that had led me here. The heartbreak, the betrayals, the years of trying to be the daughter my parents never truly wanted. And I realized something important. I didn't lose my family. I simply discovered who they really were. I'd been asked recently whether achieving financial success had been worth the cost of losing my family. The truth was that I hadn't lost anything worth keeping. Instead, I'd freed myself from people who never treated me like family in the first place. My success hadn't made me cold or cruel. It had simply given me the power to say no and to value my own peace over other people's demands. So now, as I step into a new city, a new job, and a new chapter, I carry with me the knowledge that I am enough, exactly as I am. I don't owe anyone my silence, my forgiveness, or my money. I owe myself the chance to live freely, and for the first time, I'm truly excited about the future.